massive thank you for inviting us both over here. And it was Gert Ooms who invited us. And I actually met Gert on the banks of Cassian about 25 years ago. And we're the same sort of age. And the two of us have different people that have influenced us to go to Cassian over the years. And certainly one of my biggest influences to go there is the gentleman that sat next to me, because Cassian is his second home. He's probably fished it more than the locals have. He's probably spent more time there than the locals. He's been fishing there for 30 odd years. He's had many trips there, caught a lot of the fish. So what we're going to do today is delve into Steve's brain, Steve's mind, and find out how he tackles the lake. So if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask him, just please fire away. But let's start by rewinding the clock to your first ever trip there, Steve, which was in the 80s.
1986. And it's nice that we've got this picture, because this was pulling up outside Chez Pierre's restaurant for the very first time in September 1986. And guys, today, I mean, people travel across Europe now. It's just what we do for fishing. But back then, this was really the start of travelling abroad for fishing. It was the first time I'd ever been outside of England. I'd only been driving about 2 months, 8 weeks. So I'd probably driven 20 kilometres. That was the furthest I'd ever driven in distance. But I'd seen the pictures of Kevin Ellis, Rod Hutchinson, Richie MacDonald, and I wanted to go to this place, and I had the drive to go there, and I had the car. And that was it. And it's hard to explain to guys now that in those days there was no mobile phones, there was no internet, there was no sat-navs. You literally just had a map, and there was this little bit of blue water right down in the south of France, and that was Cassian. And then you just had to get in the car and make your own way there. And so that's what I did.
Now, unfortunately, these pictures that we've got here now are not in any order, because we've kind of turned up today without a slideshow. It's just a selection of pictures. So we're going to have to fast forward or go backwards to some of the photographs from your first trip, Steve. Talk us through some of these photos. Which one was that from?
Yeah, that was my biggest fish from the first trip. I actually caught my first carp on the first night there, which was not a big one, but this was about 19.5 kilos. It was, in those days for me, it was a monster fish. I'd never caught a fish anywhere near that size in England. And so that was, it was a huge step up in my carp fishing. But not only that, it wasn't just the fish. I'd seen pictures of Cassian and the blue water and the sandy beaches, and I didn't believe it could be that nice. But when I got there, I was blown away just by the beauty and the expanse of Cassian, and being alone there and catching a fish like that in the sunshine in the south of France. It was just magic. I fell in love with Cassian from that first moment.
Did you know when you went there, Steve, what you was fishing for? Did you know anything about the stock? What fish influenced you to go there at the time?
It was the Kevin Ellis fish, and it was the Rod Hutchinson trips that he had. They were. Rod Hutchinson was a big influence right through my fishing career. He always has been and always will be. Kevin Ellis, it was just that one capture of that huge mirror. And, I know Kevin Ellis, today he's a friend. In those days, he was just this guy who had caught this great big fish. And it's still a picture today that I look at and think, wow. But back... I'm back. But back then, when I'm talking about the biggest fish I'd ever seen in England was like 13 kilos. And there was this fish that was like 35 kilos. It was just like monster things. But I wanted to go there and try and catch them. But catching that big fish wasn't the main thing. It was just going there, experiencing it, and catching some fish along the way if I could.
So what do you remember about this photograph then, Steve? Am I correct in thinking that that's a 60-pounder? Is that your first 60 from the lake?
Yeah, it was. That was my second trip. The year later, in May 1987, in the West Arm, down the spawning bay, and some old friends are still. The middle one is Travolta. He's still around. Pete, who is without the shirt on closest, he's gone now. An old friend that's no longer with us, but he was a good friend. I actually met him there, but he was a good friend for many years. It's actually my ex-girlfriend standing up on the end.
So,
I'd say that because Joan's not here today. Honestly, she'd be ripping that down if she was here today. But
so what did you do then when you went there? Because fishing a lake like this, back in the 80s, it's a very deep lake, Cassian is. How did you start off? What was your thinking in your brain? What depth do I fish at? How far out do I fish at?
Yeah, I'd never fished anything like it. There was a lot to learn about Cassian that we just didn't know about in England. There was the depths. I mean, all we had to find the depths in those days was a marker float. That's all we used in England. And I remember casting it out, and I got fed up with it, waiting for it to land. It just never hit the bottom. And I found out later it's 30 metres deep where I was trying to... So all I did was look around at the hillsides, and where it went shallower into the lake, I thought, well, it's going to be less deep under the surface, which, is basic stuff. Didn't have echo sounders and stuff like that then. So it was all sorts of learning curves. The snags, the crayfish, all those sort of things were things that we didn't have to deal with in England, which all of a sudden we were faced with. So it was loads and loads of problems to overcome.
Is this another photograph of the 60-pounder that you caught?
Yeah, that was the 27.9, I think it was.
Okay. So, like I say, none of these photographs are in any order at all.
Let's talk about you. Talk about me. I know that was from your first trip. I mean,
yeah, that was my first trip.
What made you go to Cassian in the first place?
Rod Hutchinson, simple as that.
Okay.
Reading about the catches of there, going there for the weather conditions, trying to catch a carp from such a big water. And I actually went there for the first time a little bit later than Steve, because I'm a little bit younger than him, and I'd actually was due to go to a party at Kevin Nash's house that particular day, and we were late getting to the party, so we was late getting down to the lake. And I was lucky in that when I turned up to Cassian for my first ever trip, that turned up to the South Arm, which is the main road to the lake, and got out of the car and saw some carp jumping, that was my introduction to Cassian. And all we did is just cast to them, and we ended up catching some fish. Nothing big, but it was completely blind fishing. I had no idea what I was fishing for. I had no idea how far out and stuff like that. Over the years that I've been to Cassian, though, I have learned through the experience of going there which depths to fish at, and it's completely reversed psychology, really, in that, like when you go to fish in the winter months in England, you automatically go deeper. That's the idea. You go to the deeper water in the winter months, and in the summer months you go to the shallower water in England. But Cassian, it was reversed, and it was something that you told me about, is that in the winter months, if you go to Cassian, then you want to be in the shallower water, and you want to be in the deeper water in the summer months, which is hard to get your head around. And I remember one trip that I went there in July, and Steve had turned around to me and said, you want to be in 40 foot of water. This is in the middle of the summer months. He says, you won't catch at 42 feet, and you won't catch at 38 feet. You've got to be at 40 foot. That's how precise you need to be in some of the water, in certain areas of the West Arm, the South Arm. Those fish are in isolated areas, and it was something that you told me about, wasn't it, Steve? And is it still the way that you kind of think about your fishing when you go there?
Yeah, I mean, it's always changing, Cassian. That's the thing, and it's sort of the attraction of it for me, that the rules are always changing, the water levels change, the weather's going to be different. And, to sort of generalise, yes, it does change from summer to winter. It's deeper fishing in the summer and the autumn, and in the winter, the colder it gets, the shallower you have to fish. But also with the water levels, if the water levels are really high, like normal, the fish will come into the edge more, whereas the water levels drop and they move out and they go into deeper water. So people ask me all the time, I'm going to Cassian in September, where should I fish, what depths? And I say, it's not as easy as that. It's all sorts of variables come into it, and every session is different. Every week can be different there, and it's never easy, but there's loads of problems to overcome, but you can always find a way of catching fish at Cassian. Most of the time, it involves a lot of moving around the lake. If you're not on fish where they were the year before, you have to find them. And then the depths. Once you find the depths and you find the fish, you're away. But there's always problems to overcome there. Always.
I can remember fishing there in the winter months myself, and one of the things that really opened my eyes to being in that environment of Lake Cassian is the temperature differences. During the day, you've got some temperatures, not particularly in this photograph, but during the day you've got temperatures plus 20, and then at night it drops down to minus 20. So there's a 40-degree difference. Your lines are freezing at night in some of the winter trips I did, and then in the day you've got your t-shirt on, which is hard to get your head around when it comes to fishing, isn't it? On a lake like that, is where do you fish? What sort of things go through your mind when you're, met with those sort of conditions?
Well, it was one of the things that made the winter fishing so manageable there, is that it could be so cold at night, but then in the day, it would warm up. And whereas, like if we was fishing in England or something, in the winter it's just cold all the time. But at least in Cassian, it would be warm during the day. If it was really cold at night, high pressure, clear skies, you'd have those warm sunny days. So it made it pleasant fishing conditions, as long as you was prepared for the nights.
Now this photograph always makes me smile, this one, because it's obviously Joan, Steve's partner, with an absolutely huge carp. This is a 60-pounder, and this particular fish, as a friend of Steve, I remember when it was caught, and there's I'm going to give you my version, and then Steve will tell you his version to it, because my version and recollection of this capture is that Steve was on the lake with Joan for a long period. Nothing had happened. They'd not caught anything, and they was taking it in turns to go to the shops. And Joan had been to the shops for a regular amount of days, and Steve had been left with the rods out. And then one particular day, Joan turned around and said, "I don't want to go to the shops today. Can you go?" And Steve left the rods out, and he's gone to the shops, and then he's got back to the lake, going across the lake in the boat, and he could see that one of the rods was in. And when he got to the bank, he turned around to Joan and says, "You've got one, haven't you?" She said, "Yeah." And he looked in the net, and there was a 60-pounder in the bottom, and it was caught on one of your rods. That's my recollection of the story. I can't remember. You tell me the exact happenings for it.
Quite a bit different.
That's mates for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different stories mixed up, I think, there together. But no, we was actually catching quite a few fish that trip. I always did all of the shopping. Joan never went to the shop. She always stayed. I mean, she loves shopping, don't get me wrong. Women do, they love shops, don't they? But she didn't like going shopping out there. She used to like staying on the lake, so I used to go to the shops. But from memory, it was actually on her rod. We had rods out each. But I'd actually caught 2 fish on that same rod that day, that morning, but in darkness. Joan wouldn't go out in the boat at night or in darkness, which is fair enough. And I didn't mind because I got the fish. And so I had 2 fish that were about 15 and 18 kilos on that rod, and it was back in position, but I did go to the shops. And as I was coming back, I saw that rod had gone again. I thought, it's gone again, and that was the one. It was justice because it was on her rod. So,
how many 60s did you had from the lake when she'd had that?
Well, I'd had one.
You'd had one, so Jonah got another one. Fantastic. Now, Steve, you've been going to Cassian for many years, throughout the year, different times of the year, and I know your winter trips were certainly more famous amongst the English carp anglers. Now, if you could pick any time of the year to go to Cassian, if you only had one trip in the year, which time of year would it be?
Oh, absolutely, it'd be the winter time, December. I mean, I can talk about it now because the night fishing stopped and everything else, but we used to have a summer trip and a winter trip. And there were 2 very different trips. The summer, obviously you have the weather, the nice sunshine, and generally speaking, more action. The fish are more active, but you tended to get a smaller stamp of fish. The fish would be smaller. Whereas in the winter, especially in December, the lake would be busy in October going into November. All of a sudden, December, the lake, there was no one there. And I don't know why, perhaps people couldn't get holidays so close to Christmas, but we would have the lake almost to ourselves. And the fish would be so much bigger. It was almost like, well, they were different fish, completely different fish to what we'd catch in the summer, but generally a lot bigger. If we was going to catch the big ones, it was this sort of time.
And what sort of tactics would you be using at that time of year, Steve? Would you be putting a lot of bait out, or would you just be using a small amount, little and often? What was your standard go-to approach?
I never used a lot of bait there, even in the summer trips. You know, I'd see, I know people have used a lot of bait there and been successful, but it never worked for me. In all the years that I fished there, it was really little and often. You know, quite big baits, 24 mil baits, and perhaps 10 or 15 around each hook bait, and perhaps spread around the area. But it was never many baits. I never used lots of baits. Yeah, that was one from the very early days when I first realised about the crayfish and having to use big, extra hard hook baits.
Mm-hmm. What size are these baits then? Are these?
Yeah, they would have been about 24, 26 mil, I suppose, and they were really big for me in those days. You know, I was used to using 12 and 15 mils in England. That was what we used. 18 mil was a very big bait, but I realised, you know, from a couple of trips that you needed big baits there to combat the crayfish for one, and they were much bigger carp. They had huge, great big mouths, so that was nothing for them.
Now, because you fished there for so long, now obviously you must have seen a lot of changes on the lake, such as, you know, the environment, the buildings around the lake, you know, the water level going up and down. But over the 30 years that you fished there, have you seen much difference with regards to the fishing approach? Would you approach your fishing now very much similar to how you approached it 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I don't think there's much difference really. I mean, the fishing tactics.
Tactics, yeah.
In the very early days, the first couple of trips, I caught a lot of fish using peanuts because they were one of the baits that would combat the crayfish. You know, boilies didn't last half an hour, whereas the peanuts, you could leave them out and the carp liked them. But later on, it was that little and often baiting approach, you know, quite big baits and not many of them. Sort of stuck with that really over the years, and it's always sort of worked, you know, so I've stuck with it.
So what about different areas then of the lake? Is there certain arms that produce the bigger fish, or certain areas on the lake that tend to produce more bites? So if you was going there chasing a particular fish, is there an area or the bigger fish tend to hang out, like the South Arm?
No, I mean, there used to be fish. The South Arm in the early years was a good area for the big fish. Some of them used to live there. But in general, they just move around. You know, I've had people catch a fish. I remember Tim Paisley catching a fish, and he said, "Oh, I think that's a South Arm fish." And, you know, and like 6 weeks later, I caught the same fish up the top of the North Arm. You know, they just move around all the time. And, you know, I had a couple of winter trips in the West Arm towards the end of the night fishing, 2010, 11, where I caught a lot of fish in the West Arm. It was full up with fish. Went back the following year, and they weren't there at all. I caught one small fish in 10 days of fishing. And that was Cassian. You know, there was nothing reliable about Cassian at all. You know, you catch them in one area 1 year, next year, it might not be a fish there at all. You never know.
Am I right in thinking that you spent most of your time fishing in the North Arm compared to everywhere else?
No, in the early years I did, but as time went on, I fished trips in all arms, really.
Yeah. Okay. So, now this is a lovely fish. I always remember this fish from, I think I was on the lake with you the week after you caught this, and I think this is a North Arm carp, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, what time of year is that?
That was October.
Okay. A decent time of the year?
I just remember that fish because we was on what they call the cold side of the North Arm. I mean, the North Arm, it's the widest bit of the lake. And we was on this swim, and I was only fishing 20 metres out. But there were two guys, and they were both putting one rod right from the other side of the North Arm, right across to about 10 metres behind where I was fishing. And it was really giving me the ump. It was, you know. And every time I put a bait out, they'd come across and like 10 metres behind, like 500 metres away from the other side. And there was no need for them to do it, but it was annoying. And they saw me catch that fish, and just as I was trying to video it here, they came across to see what it was, and it's one of your favourite bits, isn't it? Because you know, I just looked round and well, I won't tell you what I said, but I wasn't very pleased to see them.
If they'd have been putting rods near me, I'd have been telling them, but you've got to know what Steve's like. This is one of the nicest guys in carp fishing. He won't say anything. If it had been me, I'd have been, get off the lake, you know, move your rods. But Steve, such a lovely bloke to fish next to. So if you see him on Cassian and get your rods next to where he's fishing, he won't say anything to you.
Yeah. Don't do it to Simon, though, you'll be in trouble.
Now, Joan, in England, she's an absolute legend when it comes to ladies carp fishing, because nowadays it's fair to say you've got a lot of Instagram guys that set up these Facebook pages, Instagram pages, and beautiful women attract lots of attention, and automatically they're carping legends because they've got a lot of followers. But Joan's been catching carp since the 80s. She's been around carp fishing even before she was with Steve. Steve and Joan actually met in the bar at Farlow's Lake in England because Joan used to work in the bar. So she was carp fishing before she met Steve. And what a lot of people don't know about Joan is that she used to be in the army, so she's absolutely bulletproof. She's a really, really strong lady, so she spends an awful lot of time outdoors. She fishes at Cassian in some of the most extreme weather conditions. And not only that, this particular fish we're looking at now, am I right in thinking that she broke a leg that particular session on the banks of Cassian?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got to look at that picture, and I'll tell you the story, because we'd been on the lake for about 2 weeks, up the top of the North Arm, nothing was happening. So we'd moved down to near the bridge, and we're on the first point here. And I would set the gear up, Joan would go for a look around, and she'd never come back for ages. And it turned out she had fallen down the bank and hurt her leg. And I said, oh, God, you know, we're going home then. And she said, no, we just bandage it up. We'll stay here. We're not going to hospital. We're not going home. We'll stay here. So did that for a week. For a week, she's literally sitting there with a bandage on her leg. And got to January the 2nd, and I knew the guards would be round to check the new permits, which they always did. So I said, we'd had no fish for a week, no bleeps, no fish, nothing, hadn't seen a fish. I said, you'll be all right, but I've got to go off and get the new permits because they'll be around. So I put her on the chair. I said, I'll be an hour. Went off under the bridge, come back in less than an hour. I was quite quick. And I looked across and I thought, she's sitting in the lake. And, you know, you can guess what happened. As soon as I've gone out of sight under the bridge, her rod's gone off. And she's had to sort of shuffle down the bank and get the landing net from behind her. And she got this one, which was 19 kilos, and it was her biggest carp at the time. And it was in January, as you can imagine, but by then she'd been on the lake with a broken leg for a week. And she caught this fish, and we stayed another week as well after that. So we stayed 2 weeks, and as soon as we got home, she was straight to the hospital, and then her leg was in a cast for the next 12 weeks, 3 months. But yeah, that was how much she loved being on Cassian.
Absolute legend, she really is. Right, let's talk a little bit about baits then, because we talked a little bit about your tactics and stuff like that. Now, people probably, I mean, there's a lot of baits to choose from now in the fishing industry. Lots of milk protein type baits, birdseed baits, fish meal baits, you name it. Have you ever found over the years that you fished there that one particular type of bait works better on Cassian, perhaps a fish meal in the summer months, or?
I learned very quickly that a really good quality bait makes a huge difference on Cassian. In the early days, those very early days when we was using peanuts, they would eat anything because it was all new to them. You know, a ball with a flavour in or whatever, they would pick it up because it was all food. But it changed very quickly. And it soon changed to the point where someone could be in a swim for a week and catch nothing. And they say, oh, well, you know, I've had no fish here. But you knew fish were there. Someone else would move straight in and start catching good fish because they had good quality bait. And it made a huge difference on there. And the guys that used the best bait on there caught the most fish. year after year, and it makes such a big difference on casting. It really does.
And one of the things that I've learned, I haven't fished Cassian now for about 20 years, and when I fished on Cassian, it's fair to say I was a lot younger then, and obviously not as experienced as I am now as a carp angler. And one of the things that I used to do when I first went to Cassian is I'd move swim a lot. If I didn't catch something in the first day, I'd be moving swim, or I'd be getting itchy feet and getting ready to move swim. And I went to Cassian quite a few times with Steve, and Steve would always plot up in a swim and stay there for a couple of weeks, and I'd be moving swim quite a lot, and at the end of the trip I'd catch some fish, but they'd all be small, and then I'd go and see Steve, and he'd been in the same swim, and he'd end up catching something 3 times as big as the ones I was catching. So is there something that you've learned on the lake from all your years of fishing there about chasing bigger fish? Would you recommend, if somebody was going to the lake to try and catch bigger fish, to stay in, find a swim, stay there, work the swim, or would you recommend moving around a lot?
No, only stay in the swim if you're on fish. I mean, moving around and getting on the fish, I was only happy to stay in a swim when I knew fish were there. And they wouldn't always stay, but quite often it was all, I've said it already, but it was all about finding the fish. And once I found the fish, I was happy to stay there then. If I didn't catch for a couple of days, fine. Because if I knew I was in the right area, I was prepared to wait. But if I didn't think that I had fish in front of me, one thing with Cassian, you could sit there for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks with no fish in front of you, and they might not come. So it was important to get on the fish. And then once I was on fish, I was happy to sit there then, for sure. But needed to be on them first.
What we're looking at here, Steve, which fish is this? Has this fish got a name from the lake? And what area is
this?
Yeah,
that was a fish called Timotei. I caught that fish twice, actually, at 20 kilo and then here at 25 kilo. Actually went on to be the second biggest fish that's ever come out of Cassian after the Kevin Ellis fish, when it was caught by Dave Walker at 35 point whatever. It's still the record at Cassian from all those years ago, 1987. But this went on to be the second biggest fish that's ever been caught from the lake. Just over 35 kilos, I think it was. But big old fish, no longer there. But
a lot smaller in the photograph. But one of the things I know that you've said to me about Cassian is it's a very rich water, and I can remember you publicising a picture in Carp Talk in England of a fish that you caught one year, and then you caught it the next year, and in 1 year the fish had grown by how many pounds, how many kilos?
That was I'd caught a fish on my first trip, I think it was, and it was 9 kilos. And a friend of mine, it was 2 years later, a friend of mine caught the same fish, and I couldn't believe it when I matched up the pictures, because it was now like nearly 20 kilos. And for us, in England,
massive difference.
In England, like a kilo or 2 kilos a year was a huge growth rate, and there was like a fish that had put on 10 kilos in less than 2 years, and it was
incredible,
mind blowing. Yeah, it was the first time I'd seen it.
Now, this particular fish, I think I'm right in saying this is probably from your favourite session on the lake. Is that right, or your best results session on the lake?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of them anyway.
Was this just right at the end of when night fishing ended? Was it about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago?
13 years ago now.
God, 13 years ago without night fishing?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know you caught this fish, which was a massive common from the lake. Talk us through it. This is down the West Arm, is it, or is this the North Arm?
North Arm.
North Arm, yeah.
Well, it was. I sort of mentioned it a little while ago that I'd had 2 good years in the West Arm when we were catching lots of fish, and of course the next year we just went back there. It's impossible not to go back to where you caught all those fish. So we went in the West Arm, and they just weren't there. I sat there for 2 weeks, caught 1 small common. And so we had to move, and we moved to the first point in the North Arm. And then in the week I had left, I had my best week on, Cassian of all time. I had that common, which was 28.8 kilos. I had a mirror, which was 29.4. I had another 2 mirrors over 25 kilos, another one that was 24.5. And it was just, I didn't catch loads of fish in that last week, but they were all big ones. And then, as it turned out, that was the last week ever of night fishing on the lake for me. So it was almost like the lake was paying me back for all them hard times, which there were plenty.
And since then, Steve, how many times have you been back to the lake when it was just day fishing? Is it just once or twice?
No, I've been back quite a few times.
Yeah.
Probably 10. That was a fleur, one of the famous old fish. That was day fishing in the summer. Probably 10 times doing day sessions. Mm-hmm. It's hard work. It's not the same, but still Cassian. You know, it's still a chance to be at Cassian.
So if anybody wanted to go to Cassian now, there is no night fishing. I know the locals are doing a little bit of night fishing. Where would you recommend people stay? Which campsites have been the best ones for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've only ever stayed in campsites, and there is a campsite called Camping de Lac Loisirs, which is only 1 kilometre from the lake, and it's only about €22 a night to put a tent up on there, and it's really nice. And you've got no choice; you can't stay on the lake, so you have to go somewhere. There are some nice sheets in areas around the lake. Down the West Arm, there's some nice sheets, and I know people stay in those as well, and they're even closer actually. Some of them are really close. There's lots of accommodation around there now. You know, it's a lot more built up and tourist orientated now than it used to be. But unfortunately, you do have to get off the lake at night, and it's hard work doing the day fishing, but it's so worth it just to be at Cassian. You know, if you haven't been to Cassian, you wouldn't know, but the people, you know, I'm sure most people here have probably been there. You get it. Once you've been to Cassian, you sort of get it, why it's so special.
What are the rules at the moment then? What time do you have to be off the lake, and what time are you allowed on the lake?
Well, it's sunrise to sunset, so it varies all through the year. But basically, you know, when that sun goes down behind the hills, you've got sort of half an hour to get off, sort of thing, yeah.
And daytime fishing is still pretty good though, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be really good, yeah. I mean, I've still caught fish most times that I've been back there, just doing day fishing, and I didn't even get up early in the morning for most trips. I found that a good time is like afternoon and evening, so a lot of the time I was just having a lay-in the morning, and we'd get to the lake about 11 o'clock in the morning, and the good time was mid-afternoon and evening, and it was enough time to catch carp.
Now there's an awful lot of older fish in Cassian, and I know they have a regular stocking policy on there. Are any of the really old fish still about nowadays?
No, in general they grew pretty fast, but they died young. You know, most of those big fish, when they got to really big sizes, they didn't have many years. You know, if you didn't catch them in 2, 3, 4 years, all of a sudden they were just gone. They would disappear. And another fish, there's been so many big fish, top of the tree fish over the years, you know, like Bernadette, Banana, the Old Leather, Half Moon, you know, all of those big fish down the years that were top of the tree, but they're all gone. They're all gone. There's big fish in there now, but they're all new fish.
Okay. What's the biggest in there now? Is there any 70-pounders, any 32-kilo fish still?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I've lost touch with what the biggest is in there now. I know there is fish over 30 kilos in there now, you know, commons and mirrors, actually. The fish are actually doing well, considering the lake has been stocked with a lot of catfish and they've bred on. The catfish are a big problem in there now for carp anglers anyway. And they've eaten a lot of the natural food, like the crayfish and everything that the carp used to grow big on. But somehow the carp are doing very well, and there is some big fish in there now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, over the years that I've been going to Cassian, and I haven't been for a while, like I say, I did do quite a lot of daytime fishing when it first opened, and it was very, very productive in those first few years, wasn't it, the daytime fishing? And in some months we was catching a lot of carp, and I actually think that 1 week that I was there I ended up catching 50 fish, but there was all small fish, there was no big uns amongst them. And do you think that the bigger fish tend to be away from the shoal fish on Cassian, or is there some always amongst the shoal fish as well?
Yeah, normally if you was catching a lot of fish like that, it would be hard to get amongst the bigger fish. You know, if some rods were going off all the time and you would be catching like 10, 12 kilo fish or whatever, it would be the one rod that was somewhere else that hadn't gone off for 3 days that would produce the big. And it was unusual. It's not impossible, but it's unusual for the big one to be in amongst the others.
Okay. That's actually from that session, that one is. That was the biggest fish of 50 fish. I caught 50 fish in a week, and it was only £38. So it tells you that what Steve's saying is correct. That's a slightly bigger one from a different session. And now you've been to casting for all these years, Steve. We've talked about the bigger fish and certain areas on the lake that's better for bigger fish. Is there a favourite swim for yourself and Joe on the lake? If you could pick one place to go back to from all the great memories that you fished at Cassian, where would it go back to? Which swim?
I think there was quite a few favourite swims on there at different times. I know, well, there's one that's very sort of special to me and Joan, I suppose, which is that first point in the North Arm, the one where she was with a broken leg. And it was also the same swim where I caught all them big fish the last week of the night fishing. So that's the one I always think of our special swim. But there was others. There was some in the South Arm, the mint swim we called it, and caught so many lovely fish from there. You know, there was a lot of nice swims on there. It all depended how the lake was at the time and the water levels, because there were some good swims on there where you go back, and if the water was right down, it wasn't a good swim. Or if the water was high, it was a better swim, you know, so it was constantly changing.
Yeah. So the North Arm, what's the name of the swim that was your favourite?
Well, the first point.
First point. Okay.
But that one where you are there, that was the first place I ever fished on Cassian, the third point. And that was a favourite as well.
You always tend to see those first, second and third points with anglers on. Is there a reason for that? Are they more productive than the others?
They're just, carp anglers go for points, don't they? You know, because they command a lot of water, I suppose.
Yeah.
And sometimes in the summer, the bays in between the points could be the most productive areas. They were really good. Now,
features-wise, the lake, we know it, is absolutely ram-packed with features. There's lots of drop-offs, lots of shelves, lots of snags, lots of weed beds, lots of plateaus. And for yourself, of all the years that you fished there, is the areas of the lake that's more productive, feature-wise? Are the weed beds more productive than the plateaus or vice versa?
No, every swim would be fished on its own merit, you know, and they'd all be different. Weed beds are good for sure. You know, the fish do love the weed around the lake and they'd be productive. But every swim and every time would be different, you know. So I would fish different depths and different areas in each swim. You know, like finding the right depth was often the key. Weed beds, I would always have, if there was weed beds in the swim, I'd always have a rod on weed beds because they were always good. But I wouldn't rely on that. You know, the other rods I'd be fishing at sort of 8 metres and 12 metres and just seeing, you know, and often you'd find like a little ledge or a little plateau in a certain depth. Might be 10 metres, might be 5 metres, and it would just look good. So everywhere was different.
Am I right in thinking that once you dived down with your goggles on into the margins right at your feet in front of you and you found carp in the weed just in front of the swim?
Yeah, I did do that, yeah.
And you caught that fish as well, didn't you?
I did catch from that spot later in the day, yeah.
So they can be right under your feet, you know, which is crazy when you've got such a big piece of water in front of you to think, because you was talking about some of the guys putting the rods at the other side of the lake when they're sometimes really close.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, it's just human nature to try and command loads of water.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, yeah, most of the time I fished within 20 metres of the bank.
Yeah. Now, I've just looked at a photograph. This is from one of Steve's.
I was just going to go back to that one.
Steve's winter trips when he used to go into the cafes on the lake. Now, I haven't been there for a while, like I say, and you used to get your permits from the cafes on the lake. You used to be able to leave your car on the cafes on the lake. You used to be able to go in there and find out all of the information. Is it still the same now, Gerard's and Pierre's?
Well, that was in Gerard's, and Gerard's is now a tourist information office. It's not even a restaurant now. But that was one great thing about the winters in those days, that, you know, every now and then they would open up and have a group in, and there was 2 main groups that used to tour the south of France along that Côte d'Azur, and this was a group called Blah Blah. And, you know, people would turn up from all over the place, but anglers were welcome to reel in and go over and have a party for the night. You know, there was no one about, so it was safe to leave the gear. And I mean, just you can't see it, but just out of that shot, I think John Van Eyck's up on the table dancing.
You didn't put that slide up earlier, John, did you?
No, he's not really.
But Gerrard's then, is it? You say it's an information area. Can you get your permits there now or not?
No, you couldn't. No, the permits are always a funny sort of thing. I mean, you just get them online now. You just go onto the French Federation website and get
Kempisch.
Yeah, just get a carte de pêche online. But you used to have to get them like in an opticians at one time. There was an opticians on the lake. You used to get them in there, or Leclerc's news agents, or one of the cafes when they was open. In the winter, they weren't open.
Yeah.
But yeah, tourist information, I don't think you can get them in there.
Now, you hear a lot of rumours going around the grapevine about the safety of your car on Cassian. If you was going now, where would you recommend leaving it?
Well, you only ever leave them now at the various loading ramps. You know, there's 4 places around, mainly around the sort of central area, where you can drive down and load and unload a boat. And either end of the bridge, in by Aveyron in the West Arm, you know, and there's one in the corner of Pierre's Bay, near Pierre's restaurant.
Can you leave them at Pierre's now?
I wouldn't have thought you can leave them at Pierre's, because Pierre's son took over and he was never the same as Pierre. So again, it's more tourist based now than what it used to be. It used to be angler based, and now it's tourist based. But yeah, you know, so we just leave them by the ramp, somewhere near the ramp, and it's always been all right. I've never had a problem.
Yeah. So we're looking at some photographs now of Steve's famous winter trips to the lake, where he used to spend Christmas months. And I used to be the editor of a magazine in England, which was a weekly magazine, which was called Carp Talk. And in the winter months in England, the catch reports always used to drop down in the winter months because it was slow fishing in England, and we always relied on Steve sending his fish pictures in from Cassian during the winter months. And you also had some really successful Christmas days on the lake, didn't you?
Yeah, that was a Christmas Day fish. I'd actually had nothing for 5 days leading up to that. You know, they could be tough, those winter trips. And I knew I was in the right area. I knew there was fish there, but I'd actually caught nothing for 5 days before that. And then Christmas morning, off it went with that one. So
Nice little present.
yeah, it was lovely. That was, yeah.
And am I right in thinking Joan used to cook your Christmas dinner?
Yeah, she'd done some brilliant Christmas dinners. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Now, this is from the North Arm. That was right on the reserve area of the North Arm, where there's a rope going across it, isn't it? And it's quite a productive swim, that is, isn't it? Because an awful lot of the fish still hide themselves away in those reserves. Now, from your experience of fishing Cassian, we see these reserves, these areas. I think there's one in the South Arm, there's one in the North Arm. Is there still one in the West Arm?
Only in the early part of the year. They close the whole of the West Arm if it's still the same situation. Yeah. For most of the spawning, and I think it's the 1st of July they open up the West Arm. Yeah. But other than that, it's closed through the early part of the year. The South Arm, I think, is open up right the way through now. And there's that one area in the barrage that's closed all year round. You're not allowed. Yeah, in the North Arm. Yeah.
Right on the rope of it, which is where that's the hot spot in it.
Well, yeah, they spend a lot of time in there now, like they do in a reserve on any lake around the world. They get to know it, don't they? So that's where they want to be.
Have you ever bent the rules on Cassian?
Never.
Yeah.
Absolutely no. I wouldn't do that. Can you not see the halo?
Have you ever been caught by the garde de pêche?
Never, apart from a couple of times.
I actually got caught once, and it was quite just a daft story between myself and Tim Paisley. Tim Paisley used to be my boss when I was working at Carp Talk, and I went to Cassian with Tim Paisley and Frank Warwick and Bob Davis, and Tim was fishing on the island in the South Arm, and he caught a fish during the day, and I turned around to him and said, "You're going to put that rod back out?" Because he was boating it across to the far margins. And the rule at the time was, which is a strange rule, you couldn't use an echo sounder in the boat during the day. And you couldn't use the echo sounder to put your rods out. So I turned around to Tim and I said, "Are you going to put that rod back out?" And he went, "No, I'm not going to put it back out because the garde de pêche could easily catch me during the day." And I turned around to him and I said, you'll be all right. They won't come out in this kind of weather and conditions. You'll be fine, just put it back out. And he said, no, I'm not going to put it out. And I went back to my swim, and I put my rod out with the echo sounder, and I got caught by the guard to Kempisch. And I got a fine for, I think it was about €50. He took a rod off me, and my fine was for €50, and I never paid the fine. I left the rod with him. So, there's still a rod somewhere in one of the Guard de Pêche offices.
Be worth a lot of money now, that probably, wouldn't it?
It was a Hutchie Dreammaker.
Be
rod.
worth a lot of money.
Now, is that you in that photograph? Is that?
That's me. And that was my very first day on Cassian.
Is it?
Very first day, yeah.
Okay.
And my second run and my first fish.
How big was that fish?
10 kilos, 22 pound. And that was what started it all. Yeah, I went there hoping, I went there for 2 weeks, and I thought if I can just catch one fish, I'd be happy as long as I didn't go home with nothing. And literally I caught one the first night. But the fish just happened to be there. I stayed on and went, I think, another 5 or 6 days before I caught the next one. The group of fish had just moved off. It was such a big learning curve, and that was just the very beginning. So I knew nothing then. I just got lucky and caught one the first night.
Now, I don't know how many of you guys have ever been to Cassian, but if there is anybody in the room who's never been and you want to go, you may be inspired to go, what is it that made Cassian your favourite lake? What is it about it that made it so special for you?
It's hard to describe. I'll say to people who say that, if you go there and you catch a fish and enjoy it, you'll totally get it. You totally get it. I went there saying to everyone I was just going to go there one time to say I'd been there and move on, carry on with my own fishing. But as soon as I got there, I fell in love with Cassian. And that was 1986, that was, 30, whatever, nearly 40 years ago now.
40 years, mate.
Next year it'll be 40 years. And it's still the best place in the world for me. And you'll only know that if you've been there. You can see all the pictures and think how nice it is, but there's a certain atmosphere and climate and everything else about Cassian that's different to everywhere else. I went there, and when I saw it, I thought there would be lots of other Cassians. There'd be other lakes that were just as good, just as nice. And although there's loads of wonderful, I've been to some fantastic waters all around the world now, and yet Cassian's still number one. It really is. There's never been another lake just like it. It's not.
Now, Steve's got his own YouTube channel, which has got lots of content on it of different venues around the globe. I think there's 1 or 2 videos on there about Cassian, so if you're ever wanting to know anything about Steve's approach of fishing the lake, I know there's a couple of brilliant videos on the Nash channel as well, but I can point you towards this particular trip because there was a video made of this trip, which was again about 20 odd years ago. It was filmed by the late Len Gerd. That's myself on the right, Len Gerd, then Frank Warwick and Steve. And during a week session, we was there in the North Arm. There is a film on the YouTube channel, which is on my channel, Simon Crowe Carpfishing. There's an old video of it. So if you wanted to go back and look at some old material of Cassian, there's plenty of stuff on on YouTube about it. How many films are on your channel? Is there 2 or 3 or?
On Cassian, there's probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
A few day session films and 30 years of Cassian, that sort of thing.
Brilliant film on the Nash channel, that one is. So if there's any info that you want to look back at, please refer to these videos. There's plenty of content on there from those trips. And is there anything else that you want to talk about just before we wind things up?
Can't think of anything else, but have any of you guys got anything to ask?
Any questions?
Good point, actually. A picture came up earlier with a polyball on the line. I was going to mention it, and then it sort of went. Yeah, actually, the polyball on the line made such a difference to my landing ratio of the fish. It used to be the case that when you got a run, it would be a case of jumping in the boat as fast as possible and getting out above the fish as quick as possible. That's the one, yeah. To avoid the line getting snagged up over the ledge, because you was always fishing over a near ledge where there was rocks and tree stumps. And this wasn't my idea. I think originally it was Leon Hugendijk I saw it with, using it on the Orient. But I used that, all different things. It could be a bit of foam, a poly ball, anything. I think that's a ping pong ball with a bit of tubing through it. It made a huge difference because literally you could fish a slack bait runner and just let the fish run, and the fish would naturally run out to deeper water with the poly ball up behind it, and it would be taking itself. He thinks he's running to safety, but in actual fact it's running out into an area that makes it much easier for me to play the fish over deep water and much easier to land them away from all the snags. So yeah, it made a huge difference to the fishing on there. Yeah, very good point.
What would, talking about tactics, Steve, what would be your go-to setup for your line on the reels, your lead, your system, your rig? What's your...
Pretty basic stuff, really. I mean, I always have the same outlook on all the fishing that I do, and my rigs and setups aren't about getting a run. My setup is based around, will it land the biggest fish if I'm lucky enough to hook it? So, it's all about strength. I've learned enough over the years that the runs, they'll come anyway. They just do, There's times when a little tweak here and there will get you more action, but most times I get the run. The bait is really what gets you the bite. If the fish want to eat the bait, then the rest of the tackle will do its job anyway. But it's all about strong, fairly basic rigs, good enough to cope with the situation that I'm fishing in.
Braid or mono on your reel?
Braided mainline, but normally with a strong mono leader. Okay.
What sort of strength leader? 40 pound, 50 pound?
Yeah, I suppose whatever that is in 0.40 or 50, a strong leader, but yeah.
Okay. Size leads?
Yeah, again, depending on if I'm... They tended to be quite big leads because a lot of the time you'd be fishing near a drop-off, and if you got nuisance fish or wind blowing the line or a boat hitting the line, you didn't want it rolling off down the shelf. So in grams, I'm talking about like an 8-ounce lead, 6-8 ounces. What would that be? 300 grams, something like that.
What about hook links?
Yeah, just
40 pound.
Yeah, strong one. Yeah, 20 kilo. Yeah, just strong gear. Basically, just strong gear to land the fish.
Size 2 hooks, size 1 hooks.
Yeah.
Now, I know your go-to presentation tends to be, I think I'm right in saying this, it's snowman presentation for you, yeah?
No, well, on there, it used to be a lot of time just a single bottom bait, a 24 mil single bottom bait, more than anything else on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was what I was feeding with. I like to fish the hook bait similar to what I'm feeding. So if I'm feeding 15, 24 mil boilies around the area, I just use exactly the same on the rig, exactly the same.
Okay, anybody else got any questions you'd like to ask Steve about casting? John? Sorry, John. Oh, this gentleman first. Short hairs or long hairs?
Mostly very short. Yeah, it was something that was brought home to me a long time ago in England when I saw a guy catching fish next to me when I wasn't catching so many, and he had the hook right up against the bait, and I thought to myself then, yeah, it's just about getting that hook in there as fast as possible. And I've never found a long hair. I've used long hairs, but I never found them any better. There was no benefit to using a long hair. It seemed to be better just to get the hook in there as fast as possible. So I generally short hairs.
John?
And yes, young man?
Is it about dancing? Well,
I think most of them were in that 50th birthday. I think most of them were that night. In litres, oh God, I dread to think. You know those big tankers that you see in, probably a couple of those.
Shell tanker.
we drunk a few glasses between us, didn't we? At various times.
Did you ever get on the dance floor?
I might have fallen across it. Not on purpose.
Anybody else got any more questions they want to ask Steve about his 40 years of fishing at Cassian? No? Oh, one last one, sorry.
Do you fish sometimes single hook bait with no feeding?
I have done, yeah, and I've caught like that as well, but it's quite rare. I never use lots of bait, but normally I put some out there. I mean, it's fair to say that sometimes if I've left it out for a couple of days, it could well be just a single hook bait by the time I get the run. But there was one time, quite a recent trip, when we arrived for the day. It was a day session and it was very windy, really windy, and it was almost impossible to get out in the boat. So I did just cast single hook baits out, and I did catch as well. So, you know, they do work, but I always just feel a bit better with something around it.
Right then, guys, thank you ever so much for sitting and listening to us talking in English. Really appreciate you coming today. We've still got another 2 or 3 hours before we leave to go back to England, so if anybody has got any questions that they want to ask Steve, feel free to come up to us.
Well, Simon, I mean, you're experienced there as well.
Not like you are. You are Mr. Cassian, and your knowledge of Cassian is absolutely second to none, so thanks for sitting here with me.
Yeah,
and
appreciate
thank
you
to you guys
sitting there for this.
for listening to us talk today, and thanks for everybody inviting us. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.